Hello and welcome to window 22, the 22B of the 2024 Advent calendar. Apologies for those of you who heard some of this in its unedited form the other day. I don't know whether it was the mince pies or the sherry, but somehow I usurped Sydney on the 20th. But if you haven't heard Sydney's one for the 20th, go back, because mine has gone and Sydney's has rightly replaced it. Anyway, as we know, those who were listening in there that other morning, the question is, what's the name of the game? As four wise people once said, if you were to write a book on wargame design, what would be the most important chapter called, and what would you have to say in it? Well, I come at a slight disadvantage because I know that I'm going to be doing this late in the month, and both my colleagues will probably have already said the sexy bit that I would like to talk about, which is command and control and decision making, which we as wargamers all love. But I'd only be doing a self-congratulatory bit there, saying what we all like to hear. The issue for me, the chapter that I think is probably most important, is probably the one I would enjoy writing the least, and that is wargaming for professionals. All sorts of people use wargaming. Businesses use wargaming. Emergency services use wargaming. Hospitals use wargaming to try and identify issues that could come along down the track, and particularly looking at concerns that they have and how they would deal with those concerns. I'm really talking here about professionals for whom I think military wargaming could help. And I think there are two categories of people there, and they are people in the military and people who are historians. I have presented wargaming to both groups over the years, and I've found both to be frustrating, and that is chiefly limited by their lack of vision. And I'm not going to pull any punches here because I don't see any point, and it's not in my nature to do so anyway. The modern military tended for years to see little benefit in wargaming, and I'm talking about the military that I have had experience of presenting it to, so that's predominantly the British Army. With financial pressures more recently, they've tended to see analogue wargaming as a cheap way to run an exercise, using a map instead of staging a full-scale shoot, or instead of deploying troops on a full-scale exercise. However, rather like the hospitals and the businesses who were talking about them trying to prepare for an anticipated problem or issue, that does tend to be the way the military use it. They use maps of where they expect to fighting alongside the people they expect to be working alongside, against an enemy who they expect to fight, who are using tactics that they expect to encounter. And more often than not, this allows them to confirm what they already expect, because it's all about those expectations. It reinforces prejudice, it reinforces judgments that have already been made. And whilst it potentially does allow them to fine-tune plans for how they will deal with these anticipated problems, it rather misses the point that a wargame should shape expectations. It shouldn't be shaped by your expectations. It should identify the unexpected. It should place the protagonists in situations where they are not comfortable because this is what they've been trained for, but where they're confronted with horrible surprises, where allies may not be there, or if they are there, they may have different objectives, or even conflicting objectives due to different political priorities. The enemy should not do what was expected, or be where was expected. And this is where a team playing against an umpire fails to deliver the factor of the disruptor that we see in a competitive wargame. One thing is certain, and that is that when wars occur, both sides will need to do whatever they have to do to win. Your enemy will break the rules. They will break the rules that you think are there. in thinking outside the box and doing the unexpected, not doing what you've been told that they will do because you've studied their doctrine. It's only by training for this that the military can expose their leaders to unpleasant surprises and encourage them to be intellectually and operationally nimble enough to respond to the challenges that the realities of war will present. So wargaming always needs to be competitive because it encourages both parties to do the unexpected. I've long argued that wargaming in the military should take the players outside their comfort zone. And this can best be done by doing something that the military never do and placing them in an historical situation where they are taking on the role of a commander from a different era. We live in an age where on the battlefield, information overload is often the problem. Having to operate with little or no information other than out-of-date reports from your patrols and outposts is very definitely taking them outside their comfort zone. The Duke of Wellington once said, "All the business of war, and indeed all the business of life, is to endeavour to find out what you don't know from what you do." And that is what is called guessing what's on the other side of the hill. Now, this guessing what's on the other side of the hill, guessing what your opponent is thinking, guessing what your opponent is doing, and planning for how you will not only counter what your opponent is doing, but how you will get inside that ever-present OODA loop that we like to talk about. This seeing over the hill is the fundamental element of command in warfare. And to practice and understand the challenges of this by playing through scenarios from an era where information is severely limited illustrates this far better than playing games in a modern setting where the major challenge seems to be too much data. In truth, it's not. In truth, the task is now to discern which data is of value and which is purely white noise. And valuable data is still very rare. Introducing a structured program of wargaming that takes maybe officer cadets, but certainly young officers, through from the 19th century through till today will enhance their understanding of history and the basic principles of their trade that remain as true now as they did 200 years ago when the Duke of Wellington spoke. It should encourage a better depth of understanding of the development of military best practice and develop and challenge the decision-making skills of the people taking part in the games. Instead, it's used as a cheap way to have a dry run before the next deployment and look at anticipated problems. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what wargaming can do and is a huge missed opportunity to stress test the next generation of military leaders during peacetime. However, if I want to complain about the military, they have at least found wargaming, even if they misuse it. Historians are still woefully unaware of what wargaming could present them with. Recently, we've invested time and treasure in presenting historical wargaming to a larger audience. The best starting point we felt was to begin with people who shared our interest in military history, and that's been an interesting experience. What has come through is that wargaming is so often still seen as a childish diversion rather than a useful tool. So often one finds that historians will limit their experience to reading books, backed up by looking at maps. Yet, despite this, the conclusions they come to can seem questionable because they are not exposing themselves to the full range of tools that are available, in particular wargaming. Over my years combining wargaming with historical research, I found that whilst reading is the bedrock of all decent research, and that maps are great and allow us to track events, they rarely place us in a situation where we get to think as the historical participations did, or to be challenged by the decision-making that they were faced with. By taking events and playing them out on the War Games table, we allow ourselves to look through a portal onto history and examine some of the choices made, be that strategic, operational, or tactical. Actually having to consider a situation from the perspective of the commander on the ground, or even make a plan as a staff officer, gives us a unique viewpoint that simply reading a book can never allow us. The irony is that the experience of a Kriegspiel or war game would give the historian the opportunity that they would give their eye teeth for, the chance to be there when events occurred. Sadly, the professionals who would benefit from wargaming but who choose not to, or choose to only do so in a limited manner, are the hardest ones to address, as they'd be unlikely to read the book in the first place. However, the benefits that could be reaped are such that I would still say that this was the most important chapter in the book. Maybe they can buy it for Christmas.